Okay. So can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hi everyone, my name is Mahdi Afkhami. I'm a PhD student at Purdue University, and I'm a student of Dr. Elwakil. So today the research that I will be talking about is actually a review of the individual housing importance in time of disaster, in time of COVID-19. So I'm going to go through a little bit introduction of the problem and the gap. Then I'm going to talk about the methodology that I'm using in this research. And after going through a literature about talking about the problems, I'm going to end with the result and discussion and conclusions. So natural disaster happens all around the world, especially in the United States. We see it as hurricanes and tornadoes all around the country. And as a result of the natural disasters, many people need to move from their homes because their homes are either destroyed or it becomes uninhabitable. So what happens is that the local government or the federal government starts to sheltering people, and that sheltering happens in many different steps. The first steps is that the people would be put in some public spaces like gymnasiums and churches, which is known as emergency sheltering. Now, the emergency sheltering itself doesn't have the best quality because there are so many people living in those kind of basic spaces. But what is more important is that the at-risk populations are even most vulnerable than normal people, and this actually happens more when there's a pandemic and outbreak. So these type of people are more susceptible of becoming ill in this kind of situation. And actually, statistics shows that the vulnerable populations are more susceptible of becoming homeless in a post-disaster scenario as well. And this only tends to grow in the future because of both the density growth in our cities that we have and the population increase that we're seeing. So right now, there's a need to actually show the importance of why we need to decongregate these emergency sheltering, especially during a pandemic. So there are some practices that are being done right now. So they're like operating more shelters at smaller capacities or using hotels and motels. And they're also using like precaution measures in sheltering, like temperature checking or using hand sanitizer. But it's important to note that those have limited applications because first of all, when we're talking about emergency sheltering, these are usually run by volunteers. And what happens is that most of the volunteers, if not all, are actually the vulnerable population, especially the elderly. So what we're seeing is actually a shortage of volunteers. And the other thing is that while they're doing precaution measurements, the problem with airborne pandemic like COVID is that sometimes the carriers are dormant. They don't show actually the symptoms. However, they could be carrying the virus. Therefore, there's a need of outlining the importance of declaring mass shelters in these situations. So what in this research we're doing is that we're investigating why it's important to have individual temporary sheltering in a post-disasters. And we're going to look and see how the current strategy actually lack and can be troubling in these time of outbreaks like COVID-19. And we're also going to outline the social factors that can play a role in severity of the issue. So these social factors can be the urban density, the life pattern of the people, and the vulnerable populations. So the data set that we used for this research was from FEMA, or Federal Emergency Management Agency. And it shows all the major disasters and declarations in the United States since 2016. We also actually explored the states with the most vulnerable population, and for that we got the data from the Population Reference Bureau. So natural disasters, as I mentioned, are happening around the country, but the hot spot for the United States is the Midwest and Southeast region, where it's especially happening hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods. Just in the year 2020, the estimate shows that more than 1 million people in these regions are facing the risk of major flooding. And when a major flood happens, many, if not all the people are susceptible to losing their homes and becoming homeless. So as I mentioned, mass sheltering is the first step that's taken by the local or federal governmental officials when a hurricane happens and people become homeless. And while the spaces, so many people would be registered in these kind of spaces. So what happens is that each person would be having an average space of 4 by 5 feet. This is by itself really small space, and considering when there's an outbreak, having that many people in those small spaces could be alarming. And COVID-19 as an outbreak, since it's an airborne particle, it can be vastly contagious and it would affect everyone in the environment. So this map, which was done by the New York Times, actually shows the outbreak in the United States. And you can see how it's dense in the Southeast and the Midwest region, where we have the problems of the natural disasters in the United States. So actually these two having the same pattern is what sounds like being alarming and something that we need to pay more attention to. Same thing is correct for the density as well, because right now more people are living in urban communities, and the population growth and the high density increases the risk of displaced people when a disaster happens.
3 more minutes, Mr. Afkhami, 3 more minutes.
Yes, thank you. So as you can see here, the same pattern, especially in the coastal areas like the Southeast region, you can see a high density of people from 1918 to 2010. So we have the vulnerable populations, which require more attention when a disaster happens. So vulnerable population can be divided by so many factors: age, gender, race, ethnicity, and so on. So I'm going to go a little bit faster to meet the time. And the risk of illness for these people rises as more significantly than the others, and they're more impacted by the living condition of temporary shelters and housing. So as you can see here, so what we have done is that we have extracted the data of the natural disaster and shown it on the maps here. So you can see how so many people so this is the impacted people from flooding in 2019. So you can see how many people, and it's not specifically to a time. As you can see, it happens all the year. And a lot of people are affected. So here you can see the people discharged or discharged by the natural disaster. Aside from California, which is due to the wildfires, you can see the Midwest region, the Southeast, is actually hosting the most unhoused people. And as mentioned before by the New York Times map, you can see how these two maps sit on each other. So we have the most outbreaks over here and the most natural disasters. And this one is actually a tree map of the elderly distribution in the United States in 2020. Again, you can see that the top 10 states that have the most elderly are from the Southeast region, with the exception of California, are from the Southeast region and the Midwest. So we can see that all these three actually meet each other. Therefore, there is a need of reevaluating the planning of sheltering when it comes to the affected people in the regions. And actually, as a conclusion, so there's a need of initiating new policies to address the vulnerable people, and there's more funding needed to support the evacuation and actually creating more shelters, especially individual shelters. And if you overlooked, of course, this issue can lead to a catastrophic results in time of disasters. So thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I'm pleased to answer.
Thank you so much, Mr. Afkhami.